You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and we are back in the ring. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is every single week, Golden Gloves Morris.
You know it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm super excited tonight, and I'm sure people think, well, Matt, you say that pretty much every single week, but this one is fun because I actually haven't seen Creed 2 until the other night when my wife and I watched it. And so I was really excited to be able to actually finally get a chance to watch this. And then, of course, be ready for when Creed 3 comes out in March. So really looking forward to that. And before we dive in, as always, we're just so thankful for you joining us here on the 602 Club. We do hope that you're enjoying the show. If you like the show, give us a star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars really helps the show grow. It makes a huge difference. And so we'd really appreciate that. You can also give us star ratings on Spotify, which is a great place to get podcasts as well. Their podcast setup is actually beautiful. I really like the way they do that. And then make sure you're subscribed. You'll get the show as soon as it drops with any podcatcher out there. And then, of course, we would love it if you would interact with Christy and I over on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We always are trying to have a good time over there and entertain. And, of course, just talk about all the things that are going on here on the show, as well as in Nerd News. You can also find us with the entire network on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's a listeners-only discussion group you can join called the Babel Conference there. It's for listeners only, and we'll ask you a few questions. We can let you in, and then you can talk about all of the things happening here on the network with all the different shows. And we've got the website, of course, at trek.fm that you could check out and see every single show that we're doing here. We've got a lot going on in the network, so we hope that you will join us there. Last but not least, we would really appreciate it if you would help the network keep coming to you by going over to Patreon. It's patreon.com/TrekFM and become part of our team. Christy and I are doing our part to give back. We did a special bonus episode called the VIP Room. Now, the VIP Room is only something you can get if you're a Patreon member. So you have to join Patreon to be able to get it. We've got some ideas of what we want to do coming up as well. There's so many great things coming out this year, so who knows what we're going to do. We are going to plan on doing more episodes of that throughout the year. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, so you can check that out as well. And again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. So, Christy, I already mentioned, that I hadn't been able to see this film in the theater. And so was Creed 2, did you rush out to the theater to see it when it first came out, or is this your first go as well?
This was my first go as well, actually. I, obviously we covered Rocky 1 through 4 on the show previously, and after that, I was kind of hesitant whether or not I wanted to see if the Creed movies would hold up to Rocky 1 through 4, and I'm also someone who sometimes has a difficulty with sequels and thinks that they don't really hold up very well. So I was reluctant to get into Creed initially, but I'm glad that we've started down that road now, and that you and I both were new to it and were able to finally see Creed 1 and Creed 2.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. And it wasn't one of those things where I didn't enjoy the first movie. I saw the first Creed movie and thought, oh, this is great. I really like this. I think this is a fantastic setup. We talked about it obviously last week, and it even held up, which was amazing. That's another thing. You want to go back to films, and if you rewatch them, you want them to be just as good as they were when you first saw them. And so this was just one of those where a lot was going on at the time. I just didn't get a chance to see it, and I've been meaning to see it for a long time. But there's so much content out there that you're trying to keep up with. Sometimes things just get lost, especially with everything that comes out. It seems like every week there's 1,000 new things coming out on streaming, and it just gets cluttered. So I'm actually really thankful that, part 3 was coming out. I knew I was going to be, getting ready to see that because I wanted to, and it gave us a great opportunity to visit it here, which, coming into this, I didn't know what the story was because I hadn't rewatched the trailers, so I really didn't have a ton going into this movie, which I really like. But this movie puts us back in the USSR, kind of. I mean, because, the USSR doesn't exist anymore, but we're back in Russia. And this movie brings back Drago and his son. And so, we all remember Drago from Rocky IV. And so I wanted to ask you, because this is it's the linchpin for the entire film. It's what everything hinges on is bringing this character back and his son. And I wanted to know how that worked for you, because it's a big risk, I think.
Yeah, I think that it's a big risk that ended up being worth it, in my opinion, because, like we said of the previous movie, you have to have enough there to start from to make it an interesting reason to even have a sequel. And so I like that they're then tying these back to Rocky IV, for example, because you've got something to go on to actually justify having this movie in the first place. And, when do we really get to see Dolph Lundgren that much in movies anymore? So that also excited me, seeing him on the cover of the movie before I watched it on streaming, knowing that he was going to be in it. It feels like finally bringing back some of the people that were like the original greats, like they've kind of done with Cobra Kai. They brought back William Zabka, and they brought back the original dojo master. I can't. Oh my gosh, what's his name? Creel, I think. Anyway, yeah. So I was all for it. What about you?
Yeah, this is a very, I think, bold choice. And part of that, I think, is that what it does is that it very much cements this as part of the Rocky universe, because this is a sequel, basically, to 4.
Yeah.
Rocky IV, and all of the repercussions of what happened in that film. And I'd say that is... I'm really struggling with this, because I don't know if it's the best choice that they could have made. And I think the reason I say that is that I feel like the movie kind of falls into that camp of having to lean too heavily on the past instead of the future, which we're creating with Creed, which, is really interesting, because, part of this movie is about, Rocky even tells Adonis about, not to live in the past where he is, to be creating the future. And yet this whole movie really hinges on the fact that, if you hadn't seen Rocky IV before this coming in, like if you're just a new fan who saw Creed, and you hadn't seen the other one, you probably, you wouldn't necessarily be utterly confused, but you would definitely be scratching your head a little bit as to why this is so important, I think. I think this means more, obviously, for all of the people who had grown up with the Rocky series. And so now I think it does make for an interesting story, but I wanted to run this by you, because I think, when I think of bringing back Drago, the fact that he has his own son and everything, and they're going to clash head to head with Rocky and Adonis, this movie, maybe this is weird, but it reminded me a lot of Iron Man 2. When you go back, you have Ivan Vanko in that movie, whose father had previously worked for Howard Stark, and then of course been fired, and it creates this animosity then between his son and Tony, which, I mean, it's pretty much the same plot for the most part. I mean, Drago has been living destitute since losing to Rocky. He's lost his wife, and he's been raising this son, and they've nothing. They've lost everything. They've lost all respect for what happened in the past, and they're trying to find a way to rectify that. And so, yeah, it was really weird because it was like this movie and the themes and the things that we got in Iron Man 2 felt very, very similar, which was weird. And the last thing on that, which was really strange, was like Iron Man 2, I felt like by relying so heavily on a lot of things from the past and even just like themes from the first movie, this movie kind of felt a little bit similar in that respect to the first Creed and some of the thematic elements there. And it's not a complete rehash like Iron Man 2 in the sense like everything's the same. But this movie did have that Iron Man 2 flavor of, to me, feeling like it's not quite the step forward I was looking for as I came into this movie with the character of Creed and Rocky himself.
And I mean, I guess I can kind of see that. I looked at it differently because it felt that with the basically the birth of Creed's new daughter, that it was going in enough of a different direction for me that it feels like, he's kind of breaking the cycle later by being a good father, by making sure that he takes time off after his injury to get better and is not even sure if he's going to go back. So I think that I forgive some of the things that maybe bothered me about the, I would say not of Dolph Lundgren's performance, but of just the actor they chose to play his son. I think maybe that's where some of your discontent with it is coming from. I could be wrong. You tell me. But I think that he didn't necessarily stand up to the acting chops of the other three men.
Christy, I like that you make that point, because I think one of the things that the movie does a disservice is to his character, because we end up having much more investment, and of course Rocky and Drago himself, plus because of what Drago did to Apollo, we have that connection then to Adonis. But they don't really give us anything other than his son, Drago's son, just kind of being this pawn in this game that his dad is playing. And I think that's something that's a little bit frustrating about the movie. And I wish that wasn't the case, because this movie kind of is about, in a lot of ways, the sins of the father. And, with Drago being so stuck in the past and his hate for Rocky and what it quote unquote did to him, he's passed that on to his son, and he's using his son to try and find redemption.
Yep.
And so that's just the first part of the theme. But, I wish that his son himself had more character development, so that, again, he really does just feel like a pawn in this. And there are little bits and pieces where, his son kind of has a moment where he's like, why are we trying to impress these people who, hated you? And, all those kind of things. And I wish we had more of that, because I think it makes his son more interesting than just kind of like this character who's being used by his dad. And that actually kind of just bothered me, I think, about the film, because again, it's more about the past than it is about the present or even the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say I kind of assumed, because of the way that they handled his character so poorly, that he was kind of dumb, honestly, and that he was just the typical guy that just does what he's told and is an uber athlete, but other than that doesn't really have an opinion on anything. And that's kind of sad, because he should. And like you said, he's being played here as a pawn in someone else's games than instead being able to make his own decisions or have any kind of input other than, that brief conversation. It's like they just make him out to be this guy that has a completely empty head otherwise. And the only other emotion you see is when his mom does reappear for a brief scene here and there. He's obviously upset about it. But that's all you get.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, they allude to the fact that she wasn't around. He doesn't know her. That's those type of things. But I just think it is just a really interesting thing where we don't really invest in him, and I think on the flip side, what's interesting about the sins of the father thing is I think it's. We dealt with this in the first movie, and this is where I get, again, this kind of Iron Man 2 flavor, is where, Adonis is struggling with the same thing his father did, which is this hubris and this pride, right? And he can't kind of let it go when he's being challenged. And like his dad, this is a situation in which his pride is going to lead to a fall. And, of course, the fall could be the same thing that befell his dad, which is he's going to leave his, newborn daughter, or at that point, his to-be-born daughter, with no father, just like he was left. And, I think that's not an uninteresting theme to be developed here in the film. It also felt like a theme that we had already kind of dealt with, at least in the first movie, so I guess I would have wished a little bit in this movie that we had found something just slightly different to kind of focus on with the character of Adonis. So it felt like, yeah, he had been able to learn that lesson, and now we can move on to something else. Look, I know in real life, many times we have to learn the same lesson over and over and over again, hundreds of times sometimes. But, when it comes to storytelling, that's not quite as interesting.
Right. Yeah, I will say the only thing that did make it better for me was that he does take that time before the fight with Drago's son the second time to really think about whether he wanted to continue on. And gets to take his newborn daughter to the ring to watch him practice. I thought was cool. And do the things that he realized he always wanted to do with his father and never got to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you, because that's kind of something that we see about this is, he has a new family. Yeah. And when he, hears that Bianca is pregnant, he is risking everything. And I also loved, the part of them having this family that, they're not necessarily ready to have a child, but they get themselves ready, which I think is really beautiful, because she's a surprise that she's on the way. And I thought it was really beautiful that they have to deal with the reality that what Bianca has could be genetic. And of course, we do find that it has been passed down to their daughter, who is deaf. And they have to deal with that reality, which I think is a really beautiful part of the movie of Adonis having to step up and face the fights of life that aren't about what's in the ring.
Yeah.
And to me, that was actually a really beautiful thing because, we all have those. I mean, most of us aren't boxers, and so, and yet we all have these bouts in life that we have to struggle with. And one of the biggest that they end up having is, of course, having to deal with the fact that, with this new family, their daughter is deaf, which is, for both of them, such a difficult road that they know that they're going to have to be on, and how, and even like just mourning the loss of the thing that she's never going to know that she doesn't have, right? Which I think is actually, every parent does that when they find out that there's something like that's, happened with their child or is, born like that. So,
yeah, I feel like that was the most relatable piece of that, is that obviously every parent would want their child to have everything. And so I'm sure that parents going through something like that have to grieve initially because you just want them to have everything and more, and for them to be missing out on something that you feel like is so essential to life is really hard.
Sure.
So I totally get that. But I love Rocky's response because it's like such a logical thing, but you don't necessarily think of it in the moment. And that was him saying, she's not in there feeling sorry for herself. So why are you feeling sorry for your daughter? She doesn't know any different.
Yeah. Right.
And so she's not going to remember that she used to be able to hear and then became deaf, which I think might possibly be even harder. It's just, this is who she is. Right. So that meant a lot to me. And that, he's saying you should love her exactly the same.
Well, and I thought that the other really beautiful thing about that as well was, we see at the end, and one of the things that is so beautiful about the world in which we live is there are so many opportunities for people to receive help in hearing loss, and the fact that she has these new hearing aids on. And so she is not going to be completely deaf, it looks like, by what they show at the end of the movie, which is beautiful. And so, but yeah, being there for your family, no matter what happens, and just supporting them and loving them is really the most important thing. And, it's definitely one of the things that we absolutely learn, I think, through this movie. That's what's important. And I really liked that. And I was interested because, Rocky's lessons for Adonis in this movie are so interesting. And I enjoyed watching the struggle that Rocky has on trying to teach Creed what it means to be a good man and not just a good fighter. And how difficult that is because obviously, this is like his son in so many ways. And yet sometimes you have to teach people hard lessons. And part of that means you can't support the decisions that they make as an adult. And I loved the struggle here, and I obviously it plays so well for everything that happened with in the past and what Rocky has been trying to teach Adonis here in the present for his future.
Yeah, this was one of the biggest themes of the whole movie, and I love that they've brought that back even from the last film, that they have this father-son relationship and that Rocky needed to be in his corner to share his secrets, not only as a good fighter and of having beaten Drago before, but also as someone who's older and wiser in life and is able to say, these are the things that I wish I had spent more time on, like my family. And I wish that I had thrown in the towel with your dad because I had the chance to try and protect him. He may not have listened, but I should have tried. And so, you know, I love those moments that he and Donnie get together, and the back and forth where you can see that he realizes he needed to go and visit Donnie in the hospital, but he also said, I don't want to stay if me staying is making him worse. Because he could tell that Donnie was still really emotional about things. And by the same token, I love that it was Donnie's mother that asked Rocky to come out there. Donnie hadn't forgiven Rocky yet, and yet she decides to ask him to come anyway because she's like, Donnie needs you. You know, you're the father figure in his life at this point. And I love that she's really also showing Donnie as well the things that she wished Apollo had valued more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And, you know, I think that's obviously one of the things that Rocky is trying to teach Adonis as well, which is, you know, there are more important things in life to be fighting for. And you have to be doing this for the right reasons. You know, you can't be doing this, and we learn. I think this is really interesting. You know, we learn is that Adonis is doing. He fought the first time out of fear. You know, not because for love of the game. You know, for love of what he does, which, you know, is fighting and boxing. That's his livelihood, the thing that he has loved before, and this became more about fear and pride and protection of his image, as if any of those things are important. And then really, you know, choosing then against everything that people around him were telling him to do. And so therefore not having those people in his corner, right? You know, Adonis doesn't end up having really his mom in his corner. He doesn't truly have his wife in his corner. You know, or Rocky. And it's not until he gets to this point of, you know, being completely bloodied and broken that he has to come to the realization of what really matters and what's really important, and why it's okay for that second fight to happen, whereas that first fight it wasn't, you know. And that reason is because he's doing it for his family. He's doing it for himself in a positive way instead of a negative way. He's not doing it out of fear. And I think there's just a lot of really important lessons that go along with this, and it's just really great to be able to see that. I just you know, again, who's in your corner, and you know, if your friends or your family or parents or whatever, your spouse, significant other, they're not in your corner, or they're questioning what you're doing, maybe it's a good opportunity to just stop and say, maybe should I do this? Is this the right course of action?
Well, and it's sort of like the old saying, I don't know where it came from, but like if you are fighting out of anger, that you could end up making stupid mistakes because you're just going in blind, swinging, and not really paying attention. And I feel like that's exactly what happened with Donnie in the first fight. He was going in with fear and anger and pride and just came out swinging and wasn't ready for what hit him. And, you know, like, and like you said, didn't have anyone in his corner because he also didn't ask if they thought he should do it. He just said, I have to do it.
Right.
So I love that they had that piece in it of his wife even saying, well, you're going to do it regardless. You didn't ask me.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you because, too, you know, you think about Rocky telling him before the first fight, you know, this guy has nothing to lose, and he's just filled with hate, and so he's willing to do whatever it takes to win. And, you know, at that point, Adonis, because he's fighting with fear, he's only fighting to not try and lose. You know, he's not he's not on the other side willing to do what it takes to win. He's just trying not to lose. And there's a big difference there, with your motivations. And so, I really appreciate that. Again, this is one of the things I think the movie does really well, is just talking about these issues. And it is such an important thing in life. And so I really like how it all ties together. And so we talked a little bit, and this is just something I wanted to ask you. With the fact that we're using so much of the past in this film, and the fact that this is written by Stallone, and you can tell because I think there's a lot of Rocky in this movie, and a lot of the story revolves around him. With this being a Creed movie, do you think there's too much Rocky?
Maybe a little. Because I didn't feel that way about the last movie, so I'm trying to compare in my head and think about it. But yeah, I mean, I guess because of the bringing back of Drago, it's like, although it applies to Donnie because it was his father and that's how he died, was against Drago, it still feels that this is more about Rocky as a whole, because it's Drago bringing his son to fight Rocky's son, basically. It still ends up being mostly about Drago and Rocky, even though the people fighting are not them. So, yeah, I would say that. Maybe a little too much.
I felt like that as well, and I just didn't know if you did too, because it was, and this is where I think some of my reservations for them really doing a sequel basically to Rocky 4 kind of come into play, where it does feel like, I felt like the first movie was the perfect way to utilize the past to create the future, and this one just felt a little bit too much like we were dipping into the nostalgia well to help us create the story here, but not actually building the character that we're supposed to be building in a way that you would want. And again, I keep referencing it, but with Iron Man 2, a lot of that movie kind of just redoes a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same lessons that Tony had to learn in the first movie. So you kind of feel like a little bit stagnant with the character. And I think this movie, because there's so much Rocky and because this ties in so much to that past, it makes me feel like the character of Creed, even though there are lots of things that he ends up learning, he feels slightly stagnant as a character, and also it feels so similar to a lot of the things we've already seen in the Rocky films with the lessons Rocky himself has had to learn. And so it just doesn't have that sense of freshness, I think, that the first movie did. And I think maybe that's the thing that kind of comes off as, okay, this is good, but I'm not sure that it really lives up to what we had created in that first Creed film.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's a little bit better than that, just because of the things that we said about Bianca being more involved, and this really being about getting to correct the sins of the father through Creed. I think that he gets to do some things that we didn't explore at all, obviously, in the other movie. But, I do agree that there are some things here that are so similar to the other movies. And like you said, rightly so, that if you were completely new to the Creed movies and hadn't seen the Rocky movies, would you really understand what's going on?
Yeah. No, I get, and I think it's great too, that for you, it works a little bit, better. I think it is just an interesting thing, and it's always a difficult thing, I think, a lot of times when you do come into a series like this and you've got such a long-running series, and, you're trying to do a good job of tying things together and, making things, feel connected and all that. And sometimes it can work really, really well, like in that first movie, and then sometimes here you're just kind of left thinking to yourself, oh, maybe that's too much, and that there really is it's a very fine line to walk when you're doing these kind of things. I mean, obviously, Star Wars itself is a great example of that as well. That we talked about, I think, last time with, the sequel trilogy, Force Awakens, and the way they dealt with things and the way that movie dealt with the past. And so what did you think about the fact that we got the reconnection at the end with Rocky and his own estranged son, and kind of bringing that relationship back to where it should be, or at least looking like it's setting it on a path for that?
I loved that because I actually had not seen Rocky Balboa, so I didn't know that Milo Ventimiglia was going to be playing his son, and I love him as an actor. And then getting that moment for Rocky to finally meet his grandson, especially when he admits to Donnie that he wasn't there the day his grandson was born. I think it just says so much about how Rocky finally let go of all of that hesitation of not being good enough or not being able to be forgiven, and tried anyway. I thought that was beautiful, and that it's him backing up what he said to Donnie about trying to be the best man you can be and be a good father. He needed to do this with his son, and it wasn't that his son didn't want him in his life. So I thought you kind of needed that, and that it also, like I said, gives credence to all the stuff he said to Donnie. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on that, and I think one of the most interesting parts is that what we see, Adonis is, at the beginning of the movie, fearful, and that's one of the biggest reasons for why he takes the fight. And Rocky is fearful, and that's one of the biggest things that keeps him away from his son. And, because they didn't have the easiest relationship with one another. And, of course, Adrian had died, and it put a rift between them that he wasn't willing to take the risk to close. When we talk about that idea of, there being more important things in life, Rocky had been neglecting the most important thing, which is family. And I appreciate that, like you said, all of the things that he had told Adonis the whole time, he kind of starts to take his own advice and to actually work to repair his own relationship with his own son, because that's really important. And Rocky, knowing he doesn't know how much time he has left, he's had cancer, he's had to battle through that. I think that's really interesting. And I think it, there is if Rocky hadn't done that, I think the falseness would have rung in the film as well, which is, there is this huge fatherhood element between Rocky and Donnie. And why is he willing to be a good father figure for Donnie and not for his own son? Yeah. Just because his son didn't choose the same life that he did. Right. That, and that's, I think that's something that it's one of those major imperfections with the character of Rocky. And, I think that's something that probably a lot of parents can attest to, right? There are probably plenty of parents out there. My guess is that, they had a desire for their child to turn out a certain way. And when they didn't go down that road, they find themselves estranged because they're not necessarily really willing to accept who their kid is. And I appreciate that Rocky here is able to rectify, at least work to, and get on the path of reconciliation with his son. Well, and especially after seeing the way that not having that affected Donnie I think also was the catalyst that made him say, I really need to go and fix this while I'm still here.
Yeah. Yep.
So, yeah, no, we're totally on the same page.
Well, and then on the flip side of that, I think, Rocky also saw firsthand what happened with Drago and his son.
Yeah.
Drago at the end is able to let go of his own pride to save his son.
Yeah.
And to put his son before his own desires, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, in this way, I think it is a really powerful film just about fathers and sons specifically, and the difficulty that can be there when it comes to, expectations and all of those kind of things. And so that storyline, also helps play into, does Rocky basically want to be Drago, who only wanted a son one way, and wouldn't have accepted him would Drago have accepted his son if he hadn't been able to turn him into a fighter?
Right. I don't know. I don't think so originally.
Yeah.
Maybe he changed his mind.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and of course it also feels like his son never even had a chance, to have any other choice, because Drago never really gave him one. And when you raise a child in that environment of, hate and rage, it's not surprising that's how we end up with the film. And so I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about this in the first movie, of course, and, this movie has the score by Ludwig Göransson again, and then of course we've got some other choice R&B or rap music as well here on the album. So anything stand out to you at all here in the music, since of course again music is such a big deal in the Rocky films?
Actually, there were two things that stood out to me this time. I will say overall, I felt that it was a little better than the score for the first film, more recognizable and stood out a little more. But especially when they actually play a bit of Rocky's theme when Donnie is in the ring the second time with Drago's son, was great. It really pumped me up for the moment. And I love that they then included Donnie's wife in his entrance and said, well, she's a musician. She could do his entrance music. Yeah. Because it made it feel even more that like she's supporting this now. And that it was actually sung by Tessa Thompson. So I definitely liked that song as well. It's called I Will Go to War. I thought was really good. So those two moments to me were great and were a big step in the right direction above the score from the first movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought that visual image, and then of course the auditory embellishment of having her be there. Yeah. It does everything for the theme that this is a family conquering together, right? That she brings him in, she sings this song, the words of the song, and how they, talk about, going to war together and all these kind of things. Like, I just thought it was great. I think that really worked. And I agree with you. I felt like, again, the score still is not, the iconic nature of all of the other Rocky scores, but I did really enjoy, the reference to the Rocky theme song. Almost in some ways it felt like being passed on to Creed, that he had earned that mantle because he had done that thing that Rocky had been able to do. He had gone to Russia and he had been able to take out this fighter that nobody thought he would be able to. Yeah. And, in much the same way that Rocky had to, which is he had to learn to endure punishment. And so I thought that was really good.
There was one side note thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I definitely noticed this moment and it made me laugh out loud. It was so funny. I love or did you love the moment when Donnie's injured and he's talking to Rocky in the trophy room, and he tries to like throw some shade at Rocky, and Rocky says, well, I wouldn't throw too much seeing as I actually beat the guy.
Yeah. That was
like, you're
great.
not going to top me, kid.
Yes. Well, and I mean, I think you're absolutely right. That was just a great moment where they were able to reconcile their relationship together and, and then move forward and get themselves on the same page. And I think that's an important lesson, to be able to be humble enough to be reminded of something like that and take it in the spirit in which Rocky gives it. Which is, you do still have things that you can learn from me, right? And one of the big lessons I think of the film turns into being, you're never too old to learn something.
Yeah.
You're never so good at something you can't learn something new. And a different way of doing things. And a lot of times, the greatest people out there are the ones who work to try and figure out things in a different way. And so I think that's fantastic. Well, I'm really interested, Christy, because this has been kind of a up and down conversation with the film about things we liked, things we maybe, didn't. And so I'm fascinated to see where that leaves you with your ratings for Creed 2.
So I will say overall, I really enjoyed this movie, and this was my first viewing as well. And I think there were a few areas where they could still have improved some. So it wasn't quite the level I felt of the first movie. I end up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 Golden Gloves, because it still has a lot there. And especially, like we both said, the music gets better. And there's some big lessons, but there's a couple of also big things that could have been updated to play better. Pulling back a little bit on the story being so much about Rocky, or maybe giving some more information for the first time viewer of the Creed movies, to really understand what's going on and why this fight is even a thing, so that they wouldn't have had to see Rocky 4 to know. Something like that, so to make it make more sense to the average person, and then also to give Drago's son something more to do, I think would have done a lot for it.
It's interesting that with this series so far, we have been completely in sync with the ratings, and I'm right there with you. It's a 3.5. I think this is a good movie. It's better than average. I think I enjoyed watching it, and yet there is still something about it to which it just doesn't transcend that level that the first one does. And I'm really interested because, I know going into the third film, Rocky's not in the movie, and this movie kind of fully is charting a course for Creed being his own man now. And so we've had these first two films where, Creed has been able to lean on Rocky in a really good way, in the way that all of us need to lean on mentors. And this next film, we're going to take the step of having him have to be able to, it looks like, kind of stand on his own. So I'm fascinated to see that. This is still a good movie. I still really enjoyed watching it, and I'm excited to see part 3. But what I'm also really excited about, Christy, is to see what you're going to recommend to everybody this week.
So obviously, I'm a geek, but you can be a geek about other things as well. And something I'm a super geek about is organizing things. Don't know if you knew that about me, but it drives me crazy when things are out of order and not color-coded. So something I really enjoyed watching for the first time was actually The Home Edit on Netflix. It's actually a small business that started with two women that became friends and both had a passion for reorganizing their homes, and that's Clea and Joanna. And they also now have launched this show, this collection with Target, all of this stuff to help people basically live a more satisfying life and feel that your home makes sense the way that it's laid out and organized. So I really recommend checking out the Home Edit, and especially if you feel like you need like a closet cleanse or a kitchen reorganizing. It's really, #satisfying.
That's awesome. I love good organized place as well. So that's really cool. I am going to recommend something my wife and I just started watching on Apple TV Plus. There's a brand new show there by the creator of Scrubs as well as Ted Lasso called Shrinking. It's a show with Jason Segel, and it's also got Harrison Ford in the show as well. And he plays a shrink who has lost his wife and is struggling to deal with that, as well as, raise his teenage daughter and still do his job as a shrink. And we watched the first 2 episodes and really enjoyed it. So I definitely recommend, especially, if you liked Ted Lasso and the way in which that show is really able to kind of make you feel good, while at the same time not shying away from life. I think it's fantastic. So I think everybody should check out Shrinking on Apple TV Plus. But Christy, where would everybody catch up with you if they wanted to see what else you've got going on?
Well, I don't know if you've heard, but I am now officially on Letterboxd. I'm going to make sure I include that every time.
Yes!
Yeah, Matt convinced me. He was like, today's the day, do the thing. So I did. I'm on Letterboxd, Instagram, and Twitter at Bespin Bell, of course. And you can find me in the Babel Conference as well on Facebook. And make sure you become a Patreon supporter so that you can listen to the VIP room and all the future Patreon-only episodes we have coming out. And then, of course, like I mentioned last time, I am restarting Sabers and Spells with Amanda and Teresa over on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network. So stay tuned for our first new episode coming out soon.
Very nice. And you can also find me all over social media under the name MattRushing02. So Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero. You can also, of course, find me here in the 602 Club with Snyder Cuts, as well as Assembling Avengers. John and I should have a new Assembling Avengers coming out very soon. You can also find me doing Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise. You can also find me doing Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek. The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And Artificial Tango is coming right around the corner with Star Trek Picard Season 3 as that show looks to wrap up. And then you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network with 2 shows. One is called Owl Post. Did that with Drea Kaufman. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then last but not least, the great John Mills and I are talking about Star Wars over on Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast. So I hope you'll check that out. But thank you so much for joining us.
Living in America.